Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next instalment of our Art of CyberWar. And today I'm delighted to have returning back for his second time, the amazing Jeff White. He is going to be talking about another chapter of his investigative journey in cybercrime. And I've heard this story before, and it is an absolute treat. It's amazing. I love crime and I love digital crime. And so it's amazing that we can actually hear about these stories that Jeff has to offer. But first of all, I'm going to hand you over to my counterpart, Steve, and he will talk to you about ESET in a bit more detail. Then it will come back to Jeff for his big story. And then at the end, it will come back to me for your questions that we're going to put to Jeff, and he will answer them for you. So if you want to throw any questions in, please put them in the box, in the question box, and we will ask him them at the end. So now, I will pass you over to Steve Connolly, who works with me in ESET in the marketing team. And so over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Jake. Good afternoon and welcome to this, the third actually in ESET's The Art of CyberWar series of webinars, and actually the second in Jeff's trilogy of fascinating talks highlighting how breaches occur, what the consequences can be, and the criminal networks behind them. Don't worry, I'm not going to take up too much time before we introduce you to the reason why you're here today, which is to listen to Jeff, who is a renowned investigative journalist and author of the best-selling cybercrime book, crime.com. And just to remind you, as promised, each of you will receive a physical copy of his book within the next 7 to 10 days. I wanted to take a few minutes, though, just to bring you up to speed with ESET and why we're running these, we hope, fascinating and thought-provoking sessions. So firstly, who is ESET? We've got quite a wide range of attendees today. Some people that are probably first engagement really with ESET, some people that are current clients and resellers. So therefore, quite a wide range of levels of knowledge about who we are. I'll try and keep this as relevant and succinct as possible for everyone. The first thing to know is ESET is a digital security company. We used to be antivirus, and then we were anti-malware, but now it's digital security. Now, what that reflects really is the expansion or proliferation, if you like, of attack vectors, but also attack surfaces, as we all, as business, embraced all the good things that internet-based, e-commerce has brought to our global economy. We've been in business now somewhere in the order of 30 years, just over. The history of ESET is kind of interesting. We were born in a bedroom, weren't all of us, in Bratislava in Slovakia back in 1987. The first iteration, in fact, the kernel of our endpoint detection and antivirus back then product was the legendary NOD32. The people who created NOD32, the software engineers, are still actually the owners of the company. So 30 odd years later, we're still a privately owned company, unlike quite a number of other companies in our competitive sphere, if you like, that seem to exchange hands on a regular basis. But what that does really is gives us a differential, a difference. We have the ability to focus on creating excellent solutions and not just on shareholder returns. In that 30 years, we've grown to be the largest European-based IT security company. And in fact, we're around the 4th largest company of our type in the world. We protect directly somewhere north of about 110 million users. There are estimates that are close to 150, but I'm being so conservative here about that. And indirectly, somewhere between 600 and 700 million daily users of Google through our app scanning and Chrome cleanup solutions. We're also truly a global company. We're present in 200 countries worldwide. We've got 18 R&D centers and local regional offices. And we employ over 2,000 people. And it's fair to say that approximately 40% of those people are directly involved in research and development. And that research and development is also in supporting a wide portfolio of protection solutions, all the way from consumer. So we have a consumer portfolio through all the way to large enterprise and everything in between. As I like to say, we protect everybody from Granny to Google. What many people are probably less aware of, though, are our wider connections with the intelligence agencies around the globe. We actually provide threat intelligence to and work really closely with organizations like the NCSC, GCHQ, FBI, CIA. There are other acronyms available, of course, Interpol, Europol, and others, about organized criminal gangs and malicious nation-state actors almost on a daily basis. It's fair to say then that we could be considered to be a threat intelligence-based company. So this intelligence helps us as well to create solutions and services to stay ahead of these threats and help protect individuals and organizations from malicious and damaging activities. As a consequence, threat reports and threat intelligence feeds are becoming more and more important to a wider and wider range of organizations, something that was probably something that large enterprises were more directly involved with in the past. And this is an area of expertise that ESET is also able to offer. Of course, there are practical solutions that ESET provide. Our services, solutions, and products have been evolved over time to become multi-layered to combat the aforementioned proliferation of attack vectors exploited by increasingly sophisticated cyber criminals. So these reports and feeds are a part of a wider portfolio of solutions, and it's important that they are delivered. It's important to you, I guess, that they are delivered by experts in the area. And as I said, ESET is just that. And so to the Art of CyberWar webinar series, where does all this fit and why Jeff's talk, I hear you ask? Well, I guess the answer to those questions, I'll say just this. We strongly believe that by understanding how certain breaches occurred, for example, in the first of Jeff's presentations, he explored how Sony, the mighty Sony, was nearly brought to its knees due to an innocuous email. We hope to help you understand how to prevent such occurrences in the future and add a further layer to your defenses. In this case, we hope, knowledge. It could be argued that knowing more about your adversaries, all of our adversaries, is as important as deploying the right solutions to protect you from them. And this is what the Art of CyberWar is in some small part trying to address. I've already had the privilege of listening to Jeff talk about the Bangladesh bank heist, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a fascinating story, really is brilliant. And I'm sure you'll find it useful as you think about your future strategy. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jeff in the main event. Hi, Jeff. I've already mentioned who you are, and for those who were not able to attend your first talk, please introduce yourself and tell us about what happened with the Bangladeshi bank. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. Good stuff. Let's show my screen. There we go. Fantastic. Good stuff. And I'm going to, oh, hang on, sharing. There we are. So it's all hectic trying to get the hang of these different settings and so on. Let's get started in a sec. Oh, there we go. That's the screen I was after. Great. So after all that, thanks, Jake, as well. So my name is Jeff White. I'm an investigative journalist, and I've covered technology for, among others, Channel 4 News, Audible, The Sunday Times, and BBC News, for whom recently, earlier this year, I did a podcast, which is called The Lazarus Heist, which some of you may have listened to. If you haven't, do give it a listen. It's a great, fun podcast. I don't know whether fun's the right word. Compelling would be the word I'd use, I suppose, and engaging. It's all about, as the slide there possibly indicates, North Korean government hackers and the hacks that they've been accused of, certainly by the US government. And as Steve and Jake said, I did a session before about this group's activity, their alleged involvement in the Sony Pictures Entertainment hack of 2014. And we're going to move on in this particular session, the hacks. Going to talk about how to steal $1 billion. Actual amounts may vary. A capital is risk. Jeff White is not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So we are going, you and I, our audience members, to break into a bank. And by the way, as Steve and Jake said during the run-up to this, if you have questions as we go along, do pop them in the chat. We'll try and address as many of those questions as we can at the end. I know some audiences, things occur to you as things are going along, and you forget about them all at the end. So with this, you can drop your questions in as we go. And as I say, we'll try and tidy them all up at the end. So, folks, our target is this place. That, my friends, is the Bank of Bangladesh, the national central financial institution for that country. And inside there, they are holding on to billions of dollars for a country where millions of people live in poverty. It's a key institution in that country's administration. And we are going to try and break in and steal us some of that money. So question number one, how do we get in? We'll have a look. I mean, there's some gates at the front. There looks like there's razor wire at the top there. We could try and blag our way in. We could pretend to be, I don't know, a UPS driver or something like that and try and blag our way into the front. But frankly, they have CCTV and men with guns, and I don't really fancy our chances very much. And frankly, I'm not going grey in some chokey doing bird for you or anybody else. So I think we need a better plan. We need a way into that building there. The big one in the center is their main office. The little squat one at the right-hand side is their side office. Look how many windows there are on those buildings. Dozens and dozens of windows, probably hundreds of windows in the end. And behind each of those windows is an employee, possibly a bit distracted, maybe a bit bored. If we can get through to those employees, we can bypass the security at the front door and get into the bank. And that's exactly what the hackers did. The question is, how? How do you reach out to an employee in an organization? Well, usefully for the hackers, the Bangladesh Bank employees had something that we all have, something pretty much ubiquitous in our world at the moment, email. And so when it came to breaking into Bangladesh Bank, that was how they targeted the bank's employees, by sending emails. And so on the 29th of January, 2015, these emails start arriving at Bangladesh Bank. They get sent from that email address there, yardgen@gmail.com, and sent to addresses at bb.org.db, the domain for the email addresses at Bangladesh Bank. And the emails said this: my name is Rassel Alam. I'm extremely excited part of your company, hoping you'll give me an opportunity to present my case in further detail in a personal interview. Here's my resume and cover letter attached. Now you'll notice that the attachment there is in a zip file, which could possibly be one of the first warnings for Bangladesh Bank, because obviously secreting viruses inside a zip file is a bit easier than just sending them straight out. And sure enough, that's what happened with that resume and CV. Anyone at Bangladesh Bank who opened the email, downloaded the zip file, unpacked it and looked at the documents, if their computer wasn't properly protected, they would end up infected with a virus. And that was it. The hackers are then into the bank. Well, no, they're not really, are they? They're into one bit of the bank. I mean, who's likely to receive that email from Rassel Alam? If you're going to send along a job seeker's email, where are you going to send it within the bank? It's likely to go to something useless like the HR department. That's no good. The hackers don't want to hack the HR department. They want to hack the money. They want to steal the bank's money. And the HR folks, wonderful as they are, to the bank's vaults. So the next question for the hackers is, can they navigate their way across the bank to where the actual money is and steal it? And to do this, they used a variety of pieces of malware with sort of exotic names. So one of the key problems for them, for example, is what if an employee at Bangladesh Bank got infected with their viruses but switched their computer on and off? The viruses would be wiped. So they used a piece of malware called Nest Egg, which gave them persistent access to that computer. So whenever the computer was turned off and on again, the viruses would still be accessed. The second problem, of course, is the hackers are then having to communicate with those computers to push commands into those computers that they've hacked and pull information out from those computers. How do you without getting spotted? Well, they used a thing called MacTruck, which was a way of encrypting commands sent into the computers in Bangladesh Bank and encrypting the information that they were pulling out, an encrypted tunnel in and out that meant that they could operate without the tech security staff at Bangladesh Bank understanding or knowing what they were doing. And then, of course, there's the challenge of getting from the HR department or wherever it is they've landed with their hacking email from Rassel Alam there across to where they actually control the money. And to do that, they used a piece of kit called Sierra Charlie, which beacons out to different computers, works out which computer work, and you can use the credentials from one computer to break into another computer, to break into another computer, and so on. They bootstrapped their way through Bangladesh Bank. And what was really interesting was, as they were going along, if they'd finished with a particular computer that useful and managed to move on to a computer that was more useful, they would erase their viruses on the first computer. So in total, they may have infected hundreds of different machines at Bangladesh Bank, but they were only ever active at any one particular time on a few computers. So even if Bangladesh Bank's tech security staff had discovered a computer had been compromised, they might get to it and think, well, hang on, the viruses have been deleted, there's no more activity on this computer, we're fine, we're good to go. Although should have been the telltale warning signs, those that something was amiss at the bank. And over the course of a few weeks, a few months, they start to map out Bangladesh. And they realize something really important, the hackers. They realize that even though Bangladesh Bank is based in the capital, Dhaka, that's not where all of its money is. Bangladesh Bank keeps a separate account. Here, at the New York Federal Reserve Bank in New York. It's a dollar account. So if Bangladesh wants to pay someone in dollars, they can just transfer the money straight from the New York Fed and pay them directly. The New York Fed, alongside the Bank of England, one of the key stores of foreign currency reserves for governments like Bangladesh and other countries and so on. So there's $1 billion of Bangladesh's money sitting in that building there, and the hackers are going to get a slice of it. Now, usefully, because they're inside Bangladesh Bank, because they've penetrated Bangladesh Bank systems, they're now able to transfer money out of that New York Federal Reserve Bank in the same way that any employee of Bangladesh Bank would make the transfers. They're going to use a system called SWIFT, which, as many of you will know, is a Society for Worldwide International Funds Transfers. It's basically the system by which banks message each other back and forth to coordinate transfers of money. Bank A gets a request from Bank B to transfer the money, and Bank A will transfer the money because it's come through SWIFT, because it's come through the SWIFT system. It's a trusted interbank messaging system. And it's trusted because most of the time the people who are using it are employees of the bank, because you've got to be in the bank to be using the SWIFT. But of course, in Bangladesh's case, the people who are in the bank are not just the bank's employees anymore. They are now computer hackers. And the computer hackers navigate their way to the SWIFT systems and realize that they can use SWIFT to transfer out billions of dollars potentially from that New York Federal Reserve account. The $1 billion that's in there, they can use SWIFT to transfer that money out. But it's not quite that easy. Because in order to make these transfers happen with SWIFT, they have to get around the SWIFT software. They have to convince the SWIFT software that they are legitimately, not just log into SWIFT and say, here you go, transfer the money. They've got to change the SWIFT code. I'm going to show you the changes that they made. That is the SWIFT code right there. And I imagine we have a lot of people who understand this code a lot better than I do. But let's just go through it line by line so that we're all on the same page. That first line there is some kind of important check. Have you entered the right password? Are you logging in from the right IP address, the right computer ID? Are you authorized to make this transaction? Line number 2, if you fail that important check, go to the failed line. And failed line at the bottom simply says, no money for you. You've failed the check. If you don't fail the check, you go to the next line, which says you've successfully passed the important check. You can get the money and exit the program. So the hackers realize that the key line in these lines is that second line there. If failed, jump to failed line below. If you can get round that failed line, you'll go to the success line. So they simply changed the code and replaced it with that 90 NOP, 90 NOP, which, as some of you may know, means do nothing, do nothing. So that means that when you never get to that failed line at the end, because the failed line command, the jump command to the failed line, has been deleted. So what it means is you always go to the success line. 8 bytes was all it took. Those tiny changes in the code, and the door to $1 billion bank vault suddenly swung open for the hackers. But they're not out of the woods yet. There's still one more thing they've got to get around. The story is that it's almost like a bunch of computer hackers have watched a Hollywood heist movie like Ocean's 11 or Reservoir Dogs, and they've thought to themselves, let's just do that, but in cyberspace with computers. There's so many sections of this story that basically run like a movie. And this section is one of the ones that has that in common, because you see, in the corner of Bangladesh Bank is something that's going to present a huge problem for the hackers. And it's this, which is, of course, the HP LaserJet 400 series. I'm a huge fan myself. I know they're just absolute wonderful workhorses, aren't they, of the office environment. The DPI settings alone are worth the morning of your time. Absolutely wonderful for the home publishing enthusiast. So the HP LaserJet 400 sits in the corner of Bangladesh Bank, and it's got one job, and that job is to print out records of the SWIFT transactions as they get made. Well, that's going to be a dead giveaway, isn't it? Because if the staff come into the office and they find printout after printout of transfers sitting on that printer, they're going to rumble that something's up. So the next thing that the hackers did was to change the printware so the printer would only print out blank pages. So none of the print jobs made their way to the printer. This was effectively like in the heist movies, when there's that bit where there's a camera filming the vault. So one of the criminals replaces the camera with like a loop of tape that just shows an empty vault. So the vault looks empty, the security camera watches, even though the thieves are actually in the vault doing the work. It's the same thing, and covered their tracks really well. And with that, the hackers are ready to raid Bangladesh Bank's account at the New York Federal Reserve Bank and steal the money. And this is exactly what they did. They sent out 36 transactions totaling $951 million, pretty much every red cent of the money that was held in banks in New York. But think again about those Hollywood heist movies that we've known and loved for so long. Often, if criminals want to carry out a heist, they don't do it during the week. They will wait till they've got the maximum time. They'll wait till they've got the weekend. And ideally, they will wait until they've got a bank holiday weekend because they've got even more time. And in the best heist movies, they wait until they've got a bank holiday weekend when it's, I don't know, New Year's Eve or something. Loads of noise, loads of activity for them to hide the drilling as they drill back into the safe. Again, even though this is a cybercrime, it maps absolutely onto those Hollywood heist movie plot lines. Because in this case, the hackers didn't just give themselves a bit of a long weekend, they gave themselves a 5-day bender and possibly the busiest period of time to carry out this hack for the following reasons. Think about Bangladesh Bank. They go into the bank, they're hacked into the bank, they make those transfers, those 36 transfers of $951 million. They made them at 8:36 p.m. on Thursday evening. Now, what you've got to realize is in Bangladesh, the weekend is different to the rest of the world. In Bangladesh, the weekend is Friday, Saturday. In the rest of the world, often it's Saturday, Sunday. So 8:36 p.m. on the Thursday, you're going into the weekend at Bangladesh. They know that very few people are going to be staffing the bank over the next couple of days. It's going to be a skeleton staff. But think about where the money is. The money's in New York, where at 8:36 p.m. on Thursday in Bangladesh, it's 9:36 a.m. in New York. So the hackers have all of Thursday with New York in action, knowing it's going to be overnight in Bangladesh. And on the Friday, when staff come into the bank in Bangladesh, it's going to be the weekend. It's going to be staff. And then on the Saturday, even if Bangladesh Bank discover it, it's going to be Saturday in New York where the staff are out of action. And then on Sunday, Bangladesh is back at work, but New York is still out of action. 4 days so far they've got parties, New York and Bangladesh are quite synced up, but they went one better. Because you see, once they transferred the money out of the New York Fed, the $951 million, they had to send it somewhere. They have to send it to an account. You know, you've got to make a SWIFT transfer. You've got to send it to somebody. So they sent it to, I'll just try and share my screen again. I think I got kicked out. Oh, there we go. Audience view. Lovely. Let's just see whether that's still happening. There we go. They send it to this place, to the Philippines. Now, interestingly, the Philippines, Monday, the 16th of February, 2016, is a bank holiday. So it's a bank holiday in the Philippines. So you've got days where New York's in action, but but Bangladesh isn't. You've got days where Bangladesh is in action, but New York isn't. And then even when Bangladesh Bank and New York are on the same time zone and working on it, the money's in the Philippines where it's a bank holiday. It's not just a bank holiday in the Philippines. It's even better than a bank holiday in the Philippines for the hackers. Because you see, it's a Lunar New Year bank holiday when the Philippines is full of people hitting the casinos. It's a massive public holiday, loads of people in the casino, loads of people going there, which is useful because that's where the hackers are going to send their money. But first, it goes to this place here. That is a bank called RCBC. It's in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, and it's in a street called Jupiter. And this is where it starts to go wrong for the computer hackers. They could have sent the money to any bank branch pretty much in any street in Manila. They happened to choose this place. And that's a big problem because you see, the word Jupiter causes them a big issue. When the money gets transferred out of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, the Fed's automated system starts scanning the transactions as they do with most transactions. And what they pick up is that word Jupiter, because coincidentally, completely unrelated to this hack, Jupiter is the name of an Iranian shipping vessel which just happens to be on a sanctions list. So when the New York Federal Reserve Bank's automated checking systems scan across the transactions, they pick up this word Jupiter, and even though it's got nothing to do with Jupiter Street, Manila, the transactions get flagged. And of those $951 million, only $81 million actually gets through, and it goes here to that bank branch in the Philippines. Why this RCB branch in the Philippines? Well, the year previously, 4 accounts were set up at that branch in the Philippines by the bank manager, a woman called Maya DeGito. And those accounts are then ready to receive the money. And suddenly, on the 16th of February 2016, those accounts become multimillionaires overnight. There's money washing about, suddenly multi-millionaires. Are the account holders coming to pick up their winnings, pick up their millions of dollars? No, because the account holders don't exist. They've been set up by the bank manager, despite the fact that people actually don't exist. Those accounts were set up as a conduit through which the money was going to move. And the money starts to move real quick at this point. Accounts get set up, 13 minutes later, they've got $22 million in them. The money's whizzing around that bank branch. At one point, they try and get the money out in cash, but they realize they don't have enough cash in the bank to pay out these transactions. So they order more cash from RCBC's cash center in Manila, which gets driven to the bank, $400,000 worth of it, a chunk of the money that gets to the Philippines. That's then loaded into a cardboard box. I'm not kidding. That cardboard box gets loaded into a gray saloon that pulls up outside the front of that RCBC branch in Jupiter Street. And the car drives off with the money and it's never seen again. Now, you would have thought that all of this might have been caught on the bank's CCTV cameras, but here's the thing. On Monday, the 8th of February 2016, for that one day, the CCTV was out of action and it didn't get repaired until the following day, the Tuesday, by which point the money had exited the bank. All very convenient. The bank manager, Maya DeGito, is one of the only people ever to have been prosecuted in this story and is currently facing a jail sentence of 56 years and a fine of $108 million, which, for those of you who've been paying attention, you'll notice is actually more than the amount of stolen money that ended up in the bank manager's branch. She is appealing that sentence. But the hackers aren't out of the woods yet. Yes, they've managed to hack into Bangladesh Bank. Yes, they've managed to transfer money out of the New York Fed in New York. Yes, they've managed to transfer that money to the Philippines. And yes, they've managed to deposit it successfully in accounts at this little branch in Jupiter Street, 81 million bucks. But at this point, it can still be traced. The money's still traceable through the system. So what they have to do now is they have to break the chain of traceability. It's like the bit in the cowboy movies where the cowboy was being tracked and he would bring his horse to a stream and he and the horse would go in the stream and they'd walk downstream a bit and then they'd exit. So their trackers, the people who are trying to trace them, would see the horse footprints going up to the stream but then couldn't work out where the horse might have exited the stream. It's that old trope. They've got to break the chain of traceability, because up until now, the investigators can still work out, well, the New York Fed sent it to this account in the Philippines. It's still traceable. They need to exit the traditional money system and they need to put the money somewhere else. And that's what leads them here. That is the Soler Casino in the Philippines, in Manila. It's a huge casino. It's one of the most rich casinos in the Philippines. The Philippines attracts a massive amount of gambling, particularly Chinese gambling. Gambling is illegal in China, so Chinese people have to exit and go overseas to do their gambling, and the Philippines has set itself up as a key location for that. And the Soler attracts thousands and thousands of very, very wealthy Chinese gamblers. And so when I was tracing the story after I'd visited the RCBC branch in Little Jupiter Street there, my next destination to go was, of course, going to be the Soler Casino. Now, this is a shot of the Soler Casino outside. Obviously, it's a casino. There's lots of people. There's lots of money. There's lots of security. You're not allowed to just go in and take pictures inside a casino. But nobody told me that. So here's some pictures inside a casino. That's one of the Soler's gambling things. That apparently is where people gamble. That's some card games, I guess, roulette wheels, I guess. These are some of the tables where people gamble. I know what you're thinking. Are the toilet rolls folded into little triangles at the end? Yes, they are. These are your shopping options, Bulgarian Prada at the casino. The Soler is a remarkable place. If you've never been to a high-end casino, it's an absolutely remarkable place. For me, it stands out because it's the only place I've ever been in the world where I've been offered a little chair just for my bag to sit on. There you go. That's my bag sitting on its own little chair in the casino. I guess if you just bought a handbag from Prada, you don't want it just to be sitting on the floor. But this is where the money ends up, at the Soler Casino. And I couldn't fathom this. I just couldn't. That's why I went to the Philippines, partly was to kind of work this out. Like, why would you send the money to a casino? Because I don't know about you, I don't gamble. I have no on a very deep level, I just don't understand gambling. I don't understand, if you've got money, why you would risk giving it away, even if possibly you might win some of it back. But also I can understand for money launderers, why they would take the money to a casino. And there's a number actually of really, really good reasons. First reason is what I talked about in terms of breaking the chain of traceability of the money. Because up until it hits the bank, the RCBC branch, you can still trace it. You can trace the account numbers, you can track it down. It's possible to forensically track the money and to get your hands on it and potentially to get it back, which is obviously not what the hackers want. When you take it to the casino, you take the money in there, you change it into chips, you gamble the chips, you win some, you lose some, you get your money back, you take your chips back to the casino gives you a check with the casino's name on it saying we owe you this amount of money. You take that check to the bank, and it's very difficult at that stage for the investigators tracking the money to trace the path of the dollars into the casino, through the gambling tables and the chips, and track it to a check that went out of the casino at the very end. The casino, effectively in this context, is like the stream that the cowboy is putting his horse through, breaking the chain of traceability. But that doesn't quite answer the question, does it? Because in my mind, when you go into a casino, there's a big spinning wheel with numbers on it, and somebody spins it, and you put your money down, and then 2 seconds later, you've lost your money. That's how I've perceived. That's generally how it's gone for me. Right? I'm not a particularly good gambler, so I couldn't understand why the money launderers had gone to a casino in the first place. Because yes, it washes the train of traceability, but you could lose all of your money. What I didn't realize, of course, is there's different games in the casino and there's different places to play them. So, for example, yes, if you put all 81 million on the roulette wheel, you might lose it. But that's not the game they were playing. They played a game called Baccarat, which, for those of you who don't gamble, it's James Bond's favorite game. It's hugely popular in Asia. It's effectively a game of chance. They flip some cards, you bet, you win some, you lose some. But what's really interesting about Baccarat, the reason it works from this money laundering perspective, is if you play Baccarat for long enough and you're good enough at it, you'll get back about 90% of what you put in, which for money launderers is fantastic. Normally laundering money, you lose 30, 40, 50, sometimes 60% of it. So to get back 90% of what you put in, that's really useful. But in order to do that, you have to play over a long period of time. You can't bet all 81 million on the first hand. You have to bet a little on the first hand, see how it goes, bet on the other hand, see how it goes. You have to kind of run the numbers. It takes weeks to run this kind of system and to get back the maximum gain for what you put in. So that's what the hackers did. They spent weeks at the Solaire Casino feeding their 81 million in to a bunch of gamblers, and then running the system very carefully. So they gamble a little, get back a little, do a side bet, do a counter bet to get back and recoup the maximum of the 81 million. Now, obviously, if you do this out on the casino floor, it's very likely you'll get spotted. It's quite suspicious behavior. Because for a start, the guys who are gambling didn't care if they won or lost. Because that's not the game. The game is to launder the money. The game's not to win the Baccarat game. So it's very suspicious behavior. So what they did at the Solaire was they weren't playing these gambling games in the sort of general areas, the types that I showed you, the types that you and I have access to. They hired private rooms at the Solaire. These are called junket rooms, and they're effectively a casino within a casino. So once the money went into the Solaire, it went into these private rooms. These private rooms are run by private companies. They can bet the money back and forth very carefully. They can control who's going in, who's going out. They can control how much money those people are gambling. So it's an entire system for weeks gambling the money through the Solaire in order to disguise that money trail so that the investigators couldn't get it back. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, surely Bangladesh Bank at this point had tumbled what had happened. Yes, absolutely. When they came in on the Friday, remember the weekend runs Friday, Saturday. So even on the Friday, they were starting to notice problems with the computers. On the Saturday, they were starting to really notice problems with the computers. And so they rebooted them, at which point that little printer in the corner of the office at Bangladesh Bank starts printing out records of the transactions, the SWIFT transactions. At this point, Bangladesh Bank thinks, oh shit, we've been robbed. So they try and get on the phone to the New York Fed in New York, but New York's not answering because it's the weekend in New York. And it remained the weekend, Saturday into Sunday. It was only Monday they managed to sort it out. Now, Monday, the New York Fed and Bangladesh Bank start getting on it and trying to work out where the money's gone. Of course, it's gone to the Philippines, where it's a bank holiday, further delaying things. But look, eventually, Bangladesh Bank strings it together. They arrive in the Philippines, they trace the money, and they work out that the money's ended up here at the Solaire casino. And at that point, you would have thought Bangladesh Bank pitches up at the casino, knocks at the door, says, "Hey, buddy, that's our money, we want it back." No such luck. Because unfortunately for Bangladesh Bank, at this point, the casinos in the Philippines were not regulated by money laundering regulations. And so, which some would say was to help the Philippines gambling industry get on its feet and compete. But the downside for Bangladesh Bank was that it knew its money had ended up at the Solaire and another casino across town called the Midas. It knew that that money was being gambled as they watched across the tables inside those casinos, but there was nothing, legally speaking, they could do about it. The money frittered away. In the end, the bank, the RCBC bank, handed them back, I think it was $68,000 of the $81 million that was stolen. One of the casino operators managed to give them back about $15 million, but as it stands, there's still about $65 million of Bangladesh Bank's money that's outstanding. And on the topic of those sums and figures, earlier on, I told you that the hackers transferred 36 transactions totaling $951 million. Then I told you that a bunch of those transactions failed because of that word Jupiter, and that only $81 million ends up in the Philippines. So there's still $870 million unaccounted for, isn't there? What happens to the rest of that? Well, the hackers were going to send a whole chunk of it here. That's a charity called the Shalika Foundation in Sri Lanka, and it's run by this woman here, Shalika Pereira. She's the charity boss. Now, in 2015, as the hackers are breaking into Bangladesh Bank, Shalika Pereira is trying to get funding for her cows. That's a dairy farm project she was trying to get off the ground in Matale. The Shalika Foundation, which she runs, is a charitable philanthropic foundation, and the idea was they were going to set up this dairy farm, and they needed a whole bunch of money to get it set up. Now, Shalika at this point is working with a fixer in Sri Lanka who's got some contacts in Japan who've got a lot of money and they want to invest that money in charitable foundations. So Shalika says, well, hey, maybe they could fund this dairy farm. The fixer says, yes, I've got some money for you. I've got some money from the Japanese. And he gives her this letter. Now, the logo at the top there, JICA, is the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. It's effectively Japan's sovereign wealth fund, and that is their logo. But JICA had no idea this letter existed because JICA had nothing to do with any of this. The letter looks like a grant of $20 million that's going to go to that dairy farm project that Shalika's trying to set up. But it's a fake. And if you look really closely, there's a couple of obvious giveaways that it's a fake. So they've talked about a rural electrification upgradation project. I'm not even sure upgradation is a word, but I'm pretty sure they've spelled electrification wrong. Page 2 of the letter has this, which is a photoshopped thing of a bundle of banknotes tied up with a ribbon, not generally commensurate with a sovereign wealth fund $20 million giveaway. And my favorite bit, final page of the document, says nothing can be compared to the wealth from the sale of milk and milk products, a sentiment with which I'm sure we can all agree. But look, as far as Shalika Pereira is concerned, she's getting 20 million. The dairy project is going to launch. She's going to be a big success. What she doesn't realize is that that $20 million is part of the money stolen from Bangladesh Bank. So $81 million goes to the Philippines, $20 million goes to Sri Lanka. And here's where it really falls apart for the computer hackers, because they've got $20 million they're going to wash through Sri Lanka through this charity, but it all goes horribly wrong once again for them. For a start, $20 million arriving in Sri Lanka really raises attention at the Sri Lankan bank where Shalika's got her accounts. They start to look closely at the transactions, they start to take them apart. And then they notice something intriguing. There's a spelling mistake. Instead of transferring it to the Shalika Foundation, they've transferred it to the Shalika Foundation. The bank gets worried, they freeze the funds. Bangladesh Bank then finds out that $20 million of its money went to the Sri Lankans. So they contact the bank and say, please don't transfer that money, please freeze that money, and the money gets transferred back. But it's another fascinating element to this particular computer crime. As I say, money's going to the Philippines, money's going to Sri Lanka. Now, just take a side journey for a second. I got quite interested in this Sri Lankan business because in the Philippines case, the accounts get set up at that RCBC branch, and it takes a year to set up the accounts, at the casinos, to recruit the people who are going to go into the casinos. There's a whole year's worth of work involved in the Philippines to get that money through. In Sri Lanka, that letter I showed you, the JICA letter, the thing that says Japan's going to donate 20 million to this dairy farm, that letter arrives days before the $20 million is going to arrive. So one thing that stood out to me was that the operation in the Philippines is a lot more elongated, it's a lot more involved, it's a lot more time consuming. The stuff in Sri Lanka, it was quick. Whoever was organizing that Sri Lankan end of the operation seemed to be much closer to the hackers than the Philippines end of the operation. And what's really, really interesting is we spoke to the guy who set up the deal in Sri Lanka. The Japanese guy who was telling Shalika, I've got these Japanese donors who can give you money, we spoke to him. He has all sorts of excuses for why he didn't know what was happening and he didn't know the full extent and he had no idea it was hacked money, convinced he's innocent, insists he's innocent. But one really interesting thing he said was when he was sent over to Sri Lanka to engineer this deal, the initial idea was that he would get $1 billion of money to send Sri Lanka. That was the initial idea with Sri Lanka. And that makes me think that initially the computer hackers who broke into Bangladesh Bank were going to send all the money via Sri Lanka. That was their idea. They were going to wash all the money through Sri Lanka. And that makes a lot of sense because think of how much work they had to do in the Philippines. They had to set up all those fake bank accounts. They had to move the money around the fake bank accounts. They send the money to the casino. They had to gamble the money through the casino. They had to get the money back from the casino. It took weeks to do all of this. It's a really labor intensive process. And the idea, I mean, that took a month, I think, to do $81 million through the Sri Lanka, through the casinos in the Philippines. Think how much it would have taken to do $951 million through those casinos. It would have taken months, maybe a year. In Sri Lanka, they could move the money all the way through, straight to the charity and out. So I think the Sri Lankan connection was where they were going. But let's move on because we haven't talked about the hackers themselves. We haven't talked about who was actually behind this. So let's go back to that email that gets sent to Bangladesh Bank right at the beginning of the story, the 29th of January, 2015, Ras Al Alam's email. Where does that email come from? It comes from that address, yardgen@gmail.com. Where have we heard that email address before? Well, those of you with long memories who remember my last presentation may remember the break-in on Sony Pictures Entertainment, targeted, certainly according to the US government, because they had released a film called The Interview, which was targeting Kim Jong-un and mocking Kim Jong-un. And so therefore the US government's appraisal of this was it was the work of the North Koreans. The same email addresses that were used to target Sony were the same email addresses used to target Bangladesh Bank, yardgen@gmail.com in particular. So certainly according to the US government, those behind the Bangladesh Bank case are folks like Mr. Pak Jin Hyok here. I think we met him last time in the Sony case. He, according to the US government, is a key member of the North Korean government hacking group called the Lazarus Group. And that's why we called our podcast, by the way, the Lazarus Heist. The US government's put out a 178-page indictment against Mr. Park there, detailing their accusations and the evidence they say links him not just to the Sony Pictures Entertainment attack, not just to Bangladesh Bank, but also to the WannaCry cyber attack. And there's a subsequent indictment that ties in to a whole bunch of other attacks as well. So certainly, according to the US government and investigators in the United Nations, the North Korean government hackers were behind the attack on Bangladesh Bank, Sony Pictures Entertainment, as I say, the WannaCry attack as well. And that's really interesting because you've got to look at the sort of context about this. North Korea is short of money, is run short of money. There's a whole bunch of reasons behind this. And spoiler alert, I have written a book of the Lazarus Heist, which is going to be out in June next year. And I've written a whole chapter about why North Korea runs out of money, how that happens. It is tragic to watch, but fundamentally North Korea is now trapped in a trap of its own making. North Korea ran short of money. The North Koreans' reaction, the government's reaction, was to develop nuclear weapons, which they felt would give them a seat at the international negotiating table. And it did. Unfortunately, developing nuclear weapons also meant they got placed under sanctions by the United Nations, which meant, of course, they ran out of money even quicker because you couldn't trade with North Korea. And so North Korea's solution to this was to double down on the nuclear weapons, to invest even more in nuclear technology to keep that seat at the negotiating table. It is a horrific downward spiral, and the people trapped in the gears of that downward spiral are the people of North Korea. But when you look at the timing of this, looking at the Bangladesh Bank break-in, it gets quite interesting. Just want to show you this chart very quickly. It's quite a complicated chart, but this is according to 38 North, who are a research group, this is the layout of the North Korean government when Kim Jong-il was still in charge. You'll see at the top, Kim Jong-il, who was the previous leader of North Korea, died in 2011. The reason I bring this up, I want to point your attention to that particular group there, the Reconnaissance General Bureau. This, according to investigators, is the place where Mr. Park Jin-hyok, the guy on the previous slide, that's where he works. He's part of the Reconnaissance General Bureau, the government hacking unit. Now, what's interesting is that green line shows you the RGB is now answerable to the National Defense Commission, which is one of the most senior areas of government in the North Korean government. It's one step down from the leadership, Kim Jong-il, and his successor, Kim Jong-un. What this tells you is that computer hacking is now extremely important in North Korea, and for some very good reasons. You see, I talked about the creation of the Reconnaissance General Bureau. It gets set up in 2009. Now let's look at when those sanctions start happening. March 2013, you get UN Sanction 2094, which of course we all know. I'm kidding, no, nobody knows what 2094 is, but I will bring it up so that we have the text in front of us. This is United Nations Sanctions 2094. And it says this: it's restricting North Korea's transfers of bulk cash and the country's banking relationships. This sanction in 2013 turns off the financial taps to North Korea. So let's look at the timeline. 2009, Reconnaissance General Bureau gets set up, the hacking starts getting really serious. 2013, the taps get turned off financially on North Korea. 2015, Lazarus starts hitting banks. Faced with international financial sanctions, North Korea's attitude, certainly according to investigators and the UN and the US government, has been to hack around them. But I just want to close off with flagging up to what our next session is going to be. We've got one more of these sessions to go for ESET. Because successful as this has been and amazing as the story has been, actually, you've got to look at this in context and think, well, how successful really was it for the North Koreans? As I say, initial aim, 36 transactions totaling $951 million. This is going to be literally a $1 billion payday for North Korea. Then we get 4 transactions go through to the Philippines, leaving 870 million. But the vast majority of them get turned down. The ones to Sri Lanka fail because of that spelling mistake. So in the end, what North Korea gets is 4 transactions totaling $81 million. It's not the $1 billion payday that they were after. What did they do? Well, suffice it to say, they did not stand still. North Korea worked out a whole new way of making money, and it made them amounts that would put those bank hacks into the shade. They have made something in the region of $1.3 billion, and the way they made it says even more about how North Korea is intersecting with the organized crime sector, and that's what we'll address in the next presentation, which is an absolute doozy and my favorite bit probably of the story. I hope that's been of some interest to you. I hope you've got some questions, and I'll hand back now, I think, to Jake to take some of those questions. Thank you for your time.
Wow, thank you, Jeff. I love your enthusiasm in your stories. It's incredible. I love anything to do with crime, but particularly bank robberies and bank heists. In fact, it actually got me into my career. True story. That's what I've always been into, and I've always loved the films. And you mentioned some films in your talk there. This sounds like this should be made into a film. I was thinking, you've done the podcast, you've done the book. Surely that film deal is coming. You wait, it's on its way.
It's interesting. Just to mention that, actually, we had interest from TV companies and film companies. It's all being discussed, as you know, it's confidential and stuff. But it does look like somebody's going to try and make a documentary out of it, which is very exciting, and we're really excited about that. I was really surprised that nobody sort of came forth and wanted to make a drama out of it, a fictional account, because I just thought you've got so much leeway and so much liberty to have this fun with it. But who knows? We may still get there. There's still people talking to us about it. Yeah.
I was thinking there's a similarity between the Hatton Garden job. You know, when you mentioned the 4-day weekend, well, I think the Hatton Garden robbery was over Easter weekend. Same kind of thing. They did it just before Good Friday, and they've got the 4 days before anyone even noticed. And that was a very physical crime, drilling through a wall and getting into all those containers. And they made a great film out of that. So you never know. But I really want to discuss with you.
Sorry to interrupt, but very quickly. There's an interesting echo as well in that what did for the Hatton Garden robbers was, well, firstly, the fact that apparently some of them were phoning up journalists at Sky News and trying to get interviews or trying to sort of pick themselves up. But also, what do you do? How do you fence those goods? I mean, they were stealing valuables and jewelry, and
Mm.
what did for them, as far as I'm aware, was the fact that the police were recovering this stuff, recovering this evidence. They didn't really seem to have a plan to move it quickly enough and move it away and get it. The heist is one thing; it's what you do after the heist, and it's similar to the Lazarus heist, the Bangladesh bank thing. Moving the money afterwards and getting that is actually the headache. The hacking was, in a way,
Yeah.
the easy bit, I suppose.
But I suppose the tough bit for the authorities is really locating the evidence. That's one thing, and then pinning it to someone and then getting through court. Now, I used to work in the police, and I know how difficult it is to get the evidence together. But then to actually get a court to say, you know what, this will stand up in court and we'll actually put them away, that's something different. So I know the Hatton Garden one is very different because it's, you know, physical. They were actually there, whereas this one's so hard to actually put it all down to the fact that a printer was used. I love that. A printer being pivotal to a bank heist. Oh wow, that's just amazing. That is where the film's going to pitch on. So, but you also mentioned phishing emails. This was 2016, right? We're 5 years on, going into 6 years on, and we're still fighting against phishing emails. I mean, God, how long are we going to be still fighting phishing emails dropping into consumers and businesses' inboxes?
Yeah, it's and you know, to throw ahead to the next sessions, you know, that is the tactic, and depressingly, it's remained the same tactic for, for probably 2 decades or more of cybercrime. But the interesting thing is, you know, no matter how good your email filters are, no matter how good your malware detection is, you know, this stuff will get through. And in the end, you know this, Jake, we all know this, you're relying on people. This is why I try and get this story out, to say, look, you know, it's all a highfalutin cybersecurity tale, but actually it was the employee in Bangladesh Bank who clicked that email and got tricked into it that starts all this off. And the same again at Sony. You know, but it's so hard because you've got so many employees receiving so many emails. You just can't spot everyone. You can't spot everyone. One's going to get through. Yeah.
And also the insider threat, the human element is always going to be there with cybercrime. We always think it's just zeros and ones, but of course there is a human part to it, and it's manipulating people, whether it be social engineering or phishing. But the knowledge, the human knowledge of being able to know the bank, know what they use, knowing they've got a printer, you know, all this information, most people just forget about. It's just nothing to do with it, but it adds up to such a huge picture, regardless of what they went for, whether it be $1 billion or 80 million. It's still, well, extremely frustrating and damaging to anyone's reputation. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's interesting, during the research for the series, we talked to various people and various sources. It has to be said, Bangladesh is a country where for a lot of people, there isn't a huge amount of trust in government institutions, and they regard Bangladesh Bank as being, well, kind of, you know, part of the problem. And so I think for quite a few people, they innately felt that it was an insider. Oh, it's got some corrupt bank employee who did this. So again, bank staff are having quite a hard time convincing people to say, no, look, we have been hacked. Even after that, people say, well, yeah, but you're hacked, but somebody must have let the hackers in. We were told about a couple of changes that Bangladesh Bank made to its internal systems, which some people said, oh, well, that left them more exposed to, you know, to the outside world. So, you know, I think, you know, there certainly were, I think, security failings within Bangladesh Bank, but, you know, this bunch were very persistent, very targeted. I mean, we talked about Sony in the last session. You know, they were trying every which way to get into Sony. There were multiple different attempts and attack vectors to break into Sony. So yes, there's security weaknesses in these organizations to get popped, but, you know, when you've got an assailant who's crawling all over you looking for any way in, you've got to have a certain amount of sympathy, I think, for victim organizations.
Yeah, I always think wherever there's a will, there is a way, because they will keep attacking. That's why we get the term persistent threats, because it's not like they just stop after one attack. They'll go, all right, let's keep going, and all they're going to do is get through once, and then boom, that's it, they're done. But actually, we have got a question in, and it's about the printer. Funnily enough, maybe that's the fun part of this. But one of the things I realised in your presentation was the use of analog, or sort of, piece of equipment, which is the printer, in the banking process. More to the point, the use of paper. So if the whole process had been digitized, would this have made it an easier or harder job to carry out the heist?
It's a really good question, and usefully I have got the answer to that. So I didn't, in any presentation you have to skip over some of the detail. Actually, there were two things. There were two records that Bangladesh Bank kept. One of them was I think an Oracle database of Swift transactions. So there was a digital transaction, but Bangladesh Bank, to their credit, also wanted a paper record, so that was the printer. The hackers went after both of them, so they either deleted the Oracle beg your pardon, so my webcam went off there for a second. They either deleted the Oracle database or overwrote it. They interfered with the database so that the bank couldn't see those transactions. They also went after the physical printer. And I should say there is dispute over whether the printer didn't print out anything or whether it printed out blank pages, and I've still not quite, I don't think, ever come down on one side or the other. The printer was disabled, but we don't know disabled as in blank pages or disabled as in didn't print. So but no, it's a good question. It's a good question.
And I have one more here. It's about are they getting more sophisticated? So I recently saw a graphic which highlighted the proliferation of data breaches over time. We're always hearing about a data breach every day, aren't we? What is clear is that breaches are not going away. In fact, they are growing in number and severity over time. Or so it seems. In your experience, what do you think is the main reason for this? Or is it just the sheer amount of data being collected now, or increasingly sophisticated OCG, so organised crime groups?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think it just inevitably we are giving away more data about ourselves. Companies are collecting more data about ourselves. You know, we got a curry delivered last night, and now the curry house has my email address, my phone number, my address, my credit card, and so on. Beyond my phone number, my address, yeah, certainly my credit card, but does the curry house need my email address? Why does that? And also, I ordered some stuff from a company, ASOS. I will name the company, ASOS, who, when I ordered the stuff, they forced me to set up an account. I wanted to just order the stuff, pay my. And they said, well, you know, now the last step of this process, yes, is set your password to create your account. And I was like, I don't want to, but I had no option. So now ASOS obviously have my password. I'm not quite sure, I presume they're protecting that well, but within that they've got my address and so on. So the amount of data we're sort of giving away is increasing. The amount of data companies are sitting on is increasing. What's interesting is the longer companies hang around, the more legacy data they have. So even if they're doing a good job at encrypting their current data, how many servers are they leaving behind that they've left data on that was test servers or was a server they migrated away from that's now falling out of date for security, all that sort of stuff. And what's really depressing is, frankly, the idea of GDPR was this would get better. We'd have more secure data. So I wonder whether GDPR is simply fighting against a tide that's inevitably coming in. So yeah, multiple reasons, but yeah, I don't think we're going to see any decrease in those data leak stories anytime soon.
It's funny you mentioned about email going everywhere from ASOS to the curry house. I use a burner email address for anything I buy online, but over the last year and a half, of course, like everyone, I'm buying everything online. So now my burner email address is now more popular and pinging me than my normal email address. I'm thinking, actually, the whole point of making a burner email address was that you wouldn't know anything about me, but now they know everything about me. So I need to go and get another one. Yeah, that's just something that I thought of. But we are annoyingly running out of time. I could chat to you for ages. I love what you've done, and it's fascinating stuff. And I can't wait for the third in the trio of your installments. Everyone watching will get the email reminder about the next one. It's going to be fantastic next month. So thank you once again. It's just been amazing. Everyone will get that book, which is awesome. And so, yeah, let's all get together next time. But thank you to you, Jeff. Thanks to Steve. And thanks to you all watching, wherever you are. I hope you've thoroughly enjoyed it like I have. So thank you very much.
Thanks all.